Hi, Lent is here, and you may have noticed it, but there is no shortage of people out there with blogs, posts, memes, videos, and suggestions as to how you should and could better yourself during this holy season for Christians. Okay, I admit I'm joining into the fray, but with a caveat. My primary purpose, and I'll tell you this up front, is to make the world a better place for others. Oh, and if you get something out of it, yeah, that's great as well. Welcome to the Sky Pilot podcast that explores questions of faith, spirituality, and religion. I'm Dan Matthews, and I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy the questions. Welcome to the podcast where every question is an invitation into a spiritual quest, and you're invited along for the journey. Hi, welcome to Sky Pilot Faith Quest podcast, the video version. We're glad to have you join us for this episode. I'm Dan. This is Quark, and we're your co-pilots for today's spiritual adventure. So let's blast off. Now, let me start by telling you where I got started, where I got the idea for this particular episode. I've seen a meme going around the internet, and here is the message. This Lent, keep the chocolate. Give up bigotry, judgment, misogyny, hatred, bias, and divisiveness in all forms.
How is that all?
Yeah, that's all they want you to do. So let me tell you the two problems with this suggestion. First, for me, there's an implied condescension. The person posting it is not saying, hey, this Lent, join me in giving up bigotry, judgment, misogyny, hatred, bias, and divisiveness in all forms. No, there seems to be an implied, here's a way for all you hateful sinners out there who need to change your ways. Just a friendly suggestion from those of us who have it all figured out. There are two types of things you can do during Lent, or I put the things you can give up or choose to do during Lent in two categories, internal and external. External things might be, during Lent, I'm going to read the Bible every day for 10 minutes. During Lent, I'm going to give up chocolate, as we've been talking about. During Lent, I'm going to limit my liquids to water for the season. During Lent, I'm going to give up swearing and say no curse words for the entire season. And the reason why these are popular is because they are external and they are quantifiable versus something that is internal, something like, during Lent, I'm going to be more mindful. It's not a bad thing, but it's really hard to know at the end of the day how well you did. During Lent, I'm going to be more insightful. Again, great thing to do or be, but how do you know if you're actually doing it or being it during the season of Lent? Or if you really want to give yourself an absolute challenge and want to go for the whole Megillah, the whole ball of wax, the whole kit and caboodle.
What is happening right now?
You don't really? Nothing? John Candy? Movie quote? Still nothing. Okay. Come on, Quark. John Candy, Rookie of the Year? Great movie, and it's a fun scene. Okay, play the clip.
There is no tomorrow. This is for the whole Megillah, for the whole ball of wax, for the whole kit and caboodle, for the whole enchilada, the whole shooting match. This is for all the marbles.
So, if you want to go for what John Candy was just describing, then commit to something like, during Lent, I'm going to completely eradicate bigotry, judgment, misogyny, hatred, bias, and divisiveness in all forms from my thoughts and actions. Which, let me just say, if you succeed, I'll be interested in what you decide to work on or achieve next. Might I suggest you tackle world peace? Of course, my sarcastic point is that this goal is so enormous as to guarantee that you're going to fail. You're going to fail unless you have no bigotry, bias, hate in your heart and mind at all. And then, if you don't, good for you, and you can skip Lent altogether and wait for your own personal ascension this season. So let's begin with Lent, where it came from, and how it came to be what it is. In the very early Christian church, there was a tradition of observing a period of fasting and repentance leading up to and in preparation for the holiest day on the Christian calendar, which is, of course, Easter. By about the 3rd century, this time of fasting and preparation had become fairly standardized as being 40 days. By the early Middle Ages, the tradition of Lent had very much solidified within Christianity and was observed pretty much universally at that point as 40 days, with a time of fasting and self-sacrifice, often things like not consuming meat or not consuming dairy, and, well, just avoiding other things that might be considered indulgences. It was really this time period in which the season of Lent became solidly associated with giving up things that you like chocolate, and sex.
Sex. You threw that in just to keep people interested.
Well, partially. But it is true. I thought people would find it interesting. The tradition of some people abstaining from sex in preparation for Easter probably actually goes back to the very, very early church, but really took off in the Middle Ages when the church seems to have suddenly become obsessed with sex.
So why is Lent 40 days?
Great question. Well, there are several reasons that Lent is 40 days. A primary reason, and then a bunch of secondary ones, but they're all related. The first and primary reason is that Jesus spent 40 days fasting in the wilderness. And it makes sense, right, that this period of fasting and preparation for the early Christians started and then became seen as connected to Jesus' own time of fasting and preparation. Now, the secondary reasons are very much related to each other and related to Jesus' time in the wilderness, or it could be argued that Jesus' time in the wilderness was following in their footsteps. Anyway, there are a number of examples in the Bible, and in this case, I'm specifically speaking of the Old Testament, in which the number 40 represents a time of testing, trial, self-denial, and preparation for renewal.
Such as, give examples.
Well, the flood described in the story of Noah's Ark lasted for 40 days. Moses, when he went up on the mountain and received the 10 Commandments and was going to bring them back down to the people, was up on the mountain and fasting for 40 days. After they were led out of slavery in Egypt, the Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years. The number 40 is really important in quite a few stories from the Bible. And notice also, and this is important for our point here, that each of these stories is an example of a time of way, a time of deprivation, a time of testing, but also a time of heading towards something. Jesus' time in the wilderness very much followed in that biblical tradition. He removed himself and went into the wilderness where he fasted for 40 days, was tested. But note, this was also in preparation for his coming ministry.
Oh, why do they describe Jesus' time as 40 days and nights, and not just 40 days?
Great question. Okay, it could be related to what I just said. It's likely, though, connected to a couple of things. One is the culture at the time really understood the word day to mean daylight hours, understood day as going from sunup to sundown, so the word day really didn't describe a 24-hour period like it does as much for us today. Also, when we are told Jesus is fasted for 40 days and nights, phrasing it days and nights was certainly intended to emphasize the relentless nature of his ordeal. Third, it's probably also intended to tie it together with the time of preparation described in the Old Testament. Remember, Moses went up on the mountain for 40 days and nights, as well as preparing the commandments or bringing the commandments back for the people, but also he was getting ready to come back into the world with the commandments, but also preparing for a new time for the Israelites, a new relationship, a new beginning with the Israelites. So 40 days and nights for Jesus is almost certainly intended also to imply that there is something new coming at the end of this story too. So let's recap. For very early Christians, Lent started out as a simple time of preparation for Easter. Oh, I should have added earlier, and I forgot to mention this. It was probably also during this time, the very early church, that Lent was also associated as a time of preparation for those who had been converted to the faith and wanted to be baptized. And again, as the tradition endured of fasting before Easter, it was increasingly seen as connected to Jesus' time in the wilderness. And so it, by tradition, came to be 40 days just like his time in the wilderness. And it could be argued that it was made officially a part of Christian observance with a decision about Lent that came about at the Council of Nicaea, and that would be in the year 325. Now, I am always amazed by how far away many of us have drifted from our ancient ancestors in terms of our willingness to think about spiritual discipline. I can't count the number of people who have said, oh, I could never give up alcohol for 40 days in Lent. Oh, I could never give up chocolate for the 40 days of Lent. Oh, I could never give up just whatever it is at the moment that somebody's talking about that they're taking on as a spiritual discipline, because it just is a bridge too far to think about giving up something like chocolate for 40 days during Lent. But just stop to think about it. Alcohol, chocolate are seen as a bridge too far for us, but some of our spiritual ancestors placed themselves on essentially a diet of bread and water and abstained from sex for 40 days. Chocolate doesn't seem like that much right now when we're talking about that. Now, don't panic. This year, I am going to suggest that you don't give up anything. I'm not even going to suggest that you exercise, take on rigorous discipline, or send in an enormous donation to SkyPilot FaithQuest.
Did you actually consider that last one?
No. Not as far as you know, no. Anyway, this may be the easiest and most important Lenten discipline I've ever suggested. Here it is. Be kind to someone every day. Now, I'm going to put one or two caveats on it, but it's still going to be simple. First of all, it can't be a friend, family, neighbor, or someone you know. I mean, you can do those, but that's not really what I'm talking about right now. So, my reading a story to my granddaughter or taking in the garbage cans for my neighbor, those are both really nice and wonderful things to do, but they're not really what this one is about. Be intentionally kind to someone you don't know or someone who has no real ability or likelihood of returning the favor. Your act of kindness doesn't need to be financial. Matter of fact, I would prefer it not be financial. I know people like to pay for the person behind them in line at Starbucks, which is great, but I'm suggesting something a little more connected. All I'm really encouraging is that you notice someone you would have been unlikely to notice or pay attention to in the past, and then be kind. Now, I'm going to give you an example. This idea was sparked for me recently. My wife and I went out to dinner, and recently our server at one point started to tell us a story about a frustrating interaction she had had with her father. Now, I'm at that age where I frequently get stories people want to tell me about their fathers, which is great. My initial internal reaction at this particular moment was, though, I don't really have time for this. And then I realized, that's not true. It wasn't that I didn't have time for it. It was that I didn't want to take time for this. So I went through a mental process right there and I made a decision. She seemed to need to tell this story. And I'm the person that has been placed at this moment and this time to hear it. So I thought to myself, you know what, Dan? Slow down, pay attention, and listen. Because in all likelihood, that is why I'm here right now. And you know what? It was okay.
Just okay.
No, fair enough. That is a great question to ask. And you're right. It was better than okay. That was the wrong choice of words. Because I did what I think I was being called to do in that moment. She got what I believe she needed, someone to pay attention and listen, even if for just a couple of minutes. And in the end, I wasn't inconvenienced. Matter of fact, I felt good. And I didn't feel good because I did something nice or noble, but because I had taken the time to pay attention to her, to really see her, to listen to her story. And in all honesty, I think because of it, we both felt a connection in the moment.
Do you feel that? We just had a moment.
Now here's the challenge. For the next 40 days, live your life with the assumption that God is going to put a total stranger in your path who's going to need to be seen, to be heard, who's going to need just for a moment, a minute or two, a human connection. And that, when you see it, when you realize it, that is your purpose for being there in that moment. And I promise you 3 things. First, it's going to make a difference in that person's life. Second, it's going to make a difference in the world. And third, it's probably going to make a difference in your life as well. And God knows we need more of all 3 of those right now. Thanks for watching. Please, again, like, subscribe, ring the bell. It really helps this channel grow. And on your spiritual journey, may you ask questions, seek answers, and boldly go wherever the quest takes you. Thanks for joining us here today and being part of the SkyPilot Faith Quest community. This is a great place to ask questions you wouldn't feel comfortable or safe asking in other places. And remember, the sign of a strong faith, solid religion, or healthy spiritual journey is not certainty, but that you keep asking questions.